Welcome to the Hope Podcast. My name is Jonathan James, as your host for this podcast. We are excited to bring you some amazing information about people living with bleeding disorders, navigating chronic illness, and we hope that you enjoy this podcast. Great. Well, thanks so much for joining us for the Hope Charities podcast. It's great to be with you today. I've got a good friend of mine that stopped by the office today, and it's great to see you, Jim Romano. Thanks for being here with me and joining me for the podcast.
Thanks, Jonathan. This is awesome. I love being here in Prairieville, Louisiana. So
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to working with you now professionally.
Yeah.
We've worked together. Now I work for you, so I'm very excited in my position as the Hope Legislative Consultant. So I'm looking forward to many years of helping all the populations that Hope is out there creating programs for. So this is going to be awesome.
Well, me too. And, you and I have been running around together for a long time, and we've been doing a lot of work kind of behind the scenes, a lot of things that people probably don't see, but talking to legislators, talking to congressmen, senators, and so on. But there's a lot of important work that goes on behind the scenes. Lots of leadership books out there that talk about how the quality of every meeting is the meeting before the meeting. And so there's in policy work and legislative work, there's a lot of meetings before the meeting. And so you're a master at that and have a ton of experience doing that. But for people who are tuning in, that this may be their first time seeing you and getting to know you a little bit better, tell us a little bit about where you're from and your background and how you got into doing policy work to begin with.
Sure. Absolutely. So my name's James Romano. I am currently right now a legislative consultant. I have my own firm, Care and Cure Partners. I work with some great patient advocacy groups. I spent 17 years in working for a patient assistance organization doing their policy work. How I got started, it's very personal to me. I grew up with three uncles who were diagnosed with hemophilia A. Two of them were infected with HIV. I have a long family history in hemophilia. I'm very proud of my family members. I started when I was a freshman in college. My one uncle, Ed Burke, came to Washington, D.C. to advocate on a new bill that was introduced that would compensate those in the hemophilia community who were infected with HIV. And he said, well, I was going to school at Marymount University in Arlington, Virginia at the time. And my uncle said, well, you're a poli-sci major, so why don't you come to the Hill? I'm like, am I going to get lunch? As you can tell, free dinner out of this? Yes, his only stipulation was I had to wear a tie. So I went to Capitol Hill and did the first meeting with him, and I was hooked.
Wow.
Hook, line, and sinker. We did the first meeting, and I said, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life.
Wow.
And not that parents would be happy about this, my parents, but I would skip class. I would make my own meetings. In those days, you didn't have email.
Right.
This was 1995, so email was probably very brand new. And so I would literally cut out votes in the House, which was published in the Washington Post, look at the names, call the receptionist in the Capitol and say, please transfer me to Congressman so-and-so's office. And I'm like, hi, I'm Jim Romano. I'm with the hemophilia community, and I want to meet with your health person to talk about the Ricky Ray Hemophilia Relief Act. And so for every day, every week from, this was March to I went home in May, I was up on Capitol Hill sometimes 2 times a week making my own meetings.
Wow.
So that's how I got started. And I to this day, in fact, I just did an oral history about some of it. And looking back at the meetings I did, I'll never forget the first meeting was with a congressman from New Jersey, Rob Andrews. Okay. And my knees were knocking, and I got through it. But I always tell this story because it's one of my favorites. I wanted to meet with my congressman, and I wanted to get him to be a co-sponsor of this bill. And he would meet with me on the Friday of Memorial Day weekend. That was the day I was home of my girlfriend's prom.
Oh, wow.
And he was going to meet with me at 4:30.
Oh, gosh.
So I was like, I'm not going to have time to go home then and get ready. So I showed up at his office wearing tails. I had a high maintenance girlfriend. So so I had tails. And I walk in the office, and I just happened to know the guy who was behind the desk was a guy I went to high school with. And so he was like, what are you doing here? And I'm like, well, I have a meeting with Congressman Fox at 4:30. He's like, you didn't have to dress up that much. I said, no, I have a prom after this that I'm going to. And so anyway, the congressman shows up, and he wasn't somebody I supported politically, but he got the biggest kick out of how I was dressed up. He was more interested in my girlfriend's prom, but he said to me, "I'm going to co-sponsor your bill, and I'm going to see it through Congress."
Wow.
Which and when the Ricky Ray bill passed, Congressman John Fox did speak at the press conference, and he did tell the story about me in the tux. So I always use that as an example for everybody. Make sure they know who you are. And he never forgot who I was at that point.
That's so great.
So then I worked. I went to work for a member of Congress for 4 years, and then I worked at a lobby firm, and then I went to work for a patient assistance organization. Wow. So I had a lot of experience working with patient advocacy groups. But there's nothing more that I love than going to Capitol Hill and meeting with offices and getting them to support, figuring out why they won't support what I'm trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I have a personal question about this that is probably off script a little bit, but I want to know, like, you've been somebody that has, I mean, you've had almost 20 years or maybe more of being on the Hill, and meeting with people in and out of conversations. And, for me, like you said, it's very personal. Right. What we do is incredibly personal. And so I guess my question to you is, how do you personally navigate and handle that when you're meeting with someone who you mentioned in your description there of your first meeting that you didn't align with personally on a political level, but you still had a need to try to see if you could get them to help understand what you're passionate about. And so how does that work for you when you're walking into an office where you're trying to talk to somebody and you're really trying to woo them along onto a journey that you're trying to say, look, I might not have been supportive of you for your whole career, but I still think that we can align on this one issue. How do you approach that?
That's a great question. First of all, you have to go in with the expectation that they are a good person and they want to hear from you. Now, you're going to run into different people, and there are times when I've gone into meetings and the staff person, sometimes you're going to meet with you in the hall for 10, and you got 10 minutes instead of 20 minutes of sitting in the office so you're trying to make eye contact, and they're just sitting there taking notes. What I would say to that is when a meeting's going south, I always turn around and say, well, how can we get your boss's support? And sometimes that is, well, we just need to talk to some constituents. And sometimes eventually you're going to have to go meet the member face to face. And that's why you're going to have to do your advocacy work and finding constituents who are in the community who can then talk to that person. And sometimes you're not going to get them. Like I wish to say that I could get 435 members of Congress to co-sponsor my bill. You're going to meet with some, I hate to use oddballs, but some oddballs who don't, and you have to chalk that up to. I always put people in categories. You're going to have important people who are going to vote on some bills maybe 3 or 4 times. Getting it out of committee and getting it out of subcommittee into committee onto the floor. You can't ignore those people. So if you have a problem, you have to put the advocacy services on top of them. Some people are not on the committee; they're not in power. They're just oddballs, and you just got to chalk that up to, what, we'll come back here. Sometimes it's the staff. The staff is the gatekeeper, and then sometimes and you'll be surprised what happens when the staff changes. I've had that happen several times. I go back 6 months later. There's a new staff person. The shelf life of a Capitol Hill staffer making $17,000 a year to $25,000 a year is measured in months, not years. So the odds of there being somebody new that who has a different philosophy, you can always tell that. So then I chalked up to that was the staffer, that was not the member. But I have a whole process I go through to make sure. One of the things I always tell everybody is, and I learned this very, very early in my career with John Fox, do not have preconceived notions about people who you don't agree with politically. Because I had that preconceived notion that he was never going to help me because he was a different political, and he was very helpful.
Wow.
He couldn't have been nicer. He always took a photo when he saw me. The champion of the bill that I work with, that we've been working together on, he sees me in the hallway, yells, come over here. And when I brought my daughter up to D.C., he took her for a tour of the Senate, took her to the Senate dining room. I mean, so do not go in with preconceived notions that you like or dislike a person politically, because they could be your best friend on this issue, and then 2 weeks later on a different issue, maybe not. But I always make sure that I don't let any kind of personal political agenda affect the way that's best for the community, because they can become very good friends with you.
It's a challenge for me. It's a challenge I think for everybody is understanding how to value the gatekeeper sometimes, even if, sometimes you can get a little attitude, or sometimes, I know for me as I'm getting older, it's like I walk into these places, I'm like, are my kids running this place? Like, I just, it's like, I feel like I'm, most of my doctors are younger than me now. I'm just like, man, where is time going? But, sometimes it's hard because, as time changes and things, sometimes you encounter attitudes and people that you don't necessarily appreciate, and they're not as passionate about the issues that you're passionate about. And how is it that you come in and you sort of, connect with people that you might not ordinarily align with in every way, but you can still help them get on board with what you're doing. And I've watched you do this a bunch of times, and you're quite good at it. I mean, I come from a sales background, so I know what it means to, make friends and influence people, but I don't. You bring that to a whole nother level that I haven't seen in other environments, and I appreciate that you're so skilled at that.
Well, thank you very much. I was for 4 years, I was a health legislative assistant for a member of Congress. Yeah. And I try to place myself in that person's shoes.
Yeah.
And to know that this is their 10th meeting of the day. Towards the end of my tenure, I used to let the person talk for 5 minutes and say, okay, bottom line it for me, what do you want? And so I always try to make sure that if we're going in for an educational meeting where we don't have an ask, to make sure it's, okay, this person's here to tell, their constituents here to tell your story. But if there's something we want, it's trying to come to, trying to come to a balance of, I'm here, to bring this issue to your attention, and but respect your time enough to get to the point. But you're still going to have people who are going to act bored while you're talking to them. Yeah. And so I'm trying to put myself in their place as, okay, their boss wants them to do a memo. They're thinking about, they have to basically from 9 to 5 or 10 to 4 have meetings every half an hour. And then they actually have to stay late to get the work done. And so I have to actually put myself in that position for them. Now, as people have said to me 1,000 times, they're there for us. Our tax dollars pay their salary, and that's wonderful. But they're also dealing with a member of Congress, a boss who they're sometimes intimidated by. I was lucky. I had a nice boss who liked me, but when she didn't like you, she made your life pretty hard. And for the staffers who she didn't like. So I try to put myself in their position. I always joke around saying, hey, I know I was in your position for years. I know what you're going through. So what can I do to help you to get to yes? That's how I always look at it when I go, what can we do to get to yes? There's certain people who are going to just say yes because they like to do it. And that's a bucket. There are certain people who go, I need to have some local people contact us. That's important. Then the others is, I need to know how much this is going to cost. My boss is a budget hawk. So if this is going to cost a lot of money, so you have to then brace yourself to, okay, and also know who you're talking to when you're coming into these meetings, because some people are, if you're going in with a bill that's going to cost $100 billion into a deficit hawk's office, you're either going to have to you're going to have to do a lot more work. Here's a perfect example. Jerry Solomon was a congressman from upstate New York. He was at one point voted the most stingiest member of Congress. He was chairman of the Rules Committee. But Jerry Solomon, I had met with his Health LA on the Ricky Ray bill, and I literally brought her almost to tears. I think she was tearing up, and this is Mr. He was balanced the budget. We can't be spending money, but we brought the human aspect to it. And I'm sure they heard from people from home on the Ricky Ray bill, but I remember when he signed on, I was so excited because I remember meeting with his Health LA, and I remember, and you have Jerry Solomon. He's the stingiest member of Congress. Wow, that should get, So people looked at that as a pass to, like, that's an also thing that you need strategy on, is who gets who. If you have this person, then that could bring you 4 or 5 other people. And they'll even say, hey, is Mr. So-and-so or Miss So-and-so's son on this bill? My boss, if they see them on the list, they'll jump on. And that's, understanding that helps.
That's really good. Really good. I want to dive into a little bit about United for Charitable Assistance, because this is an effort that started quite a while back, actually, and it's surrounded around some important issues. But I think the first thing that we should do is probably talk a little bit about your role and as the executive director of United for Charitable Assistance, and what is United for Charitable Assistance?
United for Charitable Assistance, it morphed out of, when I was working at a patient assistance organization and these issues started creeping up, we came up with a coalition that that the assistance group I worked with was the head of, named, we called it MAP, the Marketplace Access Partnership, or I just know we wanted to use the map of the United States. And my colleague at the time, her name was Kelly Fitzgerald, she's like, a map of the United States. And so we had the MAP coalition. But in Congress,
sometimes the acronym's better than the actual description.
Exactly. Yes. I get that. Yeah.
We have this.
Yes. So Kelly and I were looking we wanted to build this coalition, and our assistance program was going to be running it. Prior to the Affordable Care Act, and people are pro and con, and I see both sides of I've learned to see both sides of the issue. Patient assistance organizations look like the white knight, with the good guys. They're helping these patients who did not have any access to healthcare sometimes, or it was mainly keeping them in the system by paying COBRAs, or if there was a HIPAA plan, or high-risk pool plans. I said that Louisiana had almost the worst high-risk pool that I've ever seen. No offense to Louisiana, but it was $100,000.
Offensive to us citizens as well.
$100,000 lifetime or annual cap, and then for 4 years, and then a $400,000 lifetime. I was like, oh my God, you couldn't put a hemophilia person on that. But we would have to look at those type of issues. But that was viewed very positively by Congress, and by a more conservative Congress, yes. After the Affordable Care Act, that changed. It changed tremendously. I can't tell you what the exact change was, but in talking to members of Congress right afterwards, their attitude was, we don't need you anymore.
Wow.
Yes. I'll never forget Bobby Scott. He's a congressman from Virginia, and he looked at my colleague and I. We were at an event, and he goes, we don't need you anymore. We have Obamacare. We don't need you anymore. I'm like, okay. But what happens, when something happens? So first and foremost, most of the patient assistance organizations that I have dealt with, if you look at their payer mix, the biggest population are Medicare patients. Well, there's government insurance. It's the out-of-pocket expenses for Medicare Part D, getting through the donut hole at the time. That was a big deal. But even afterwards, it's the 5% catastrophic coverage. If you're a fixed income senior taking a $200,000 drug and still have to pay 5% on that, you're not going to make it.
Right.
I mean, that's going to be above your pay grade. Two, if you're a hemophilia patient on Medicare and you need a wraparound policy, Part B, Medigap or supplemental. I mean, you're gonna need help paying that premium.
Right.
So
we're seeing some that are outrageous now. I mean, we're facing all kinds of issues. We have probably at least 2 or 3 patients a week that apply for help that are $1,200-$1,500 a month.
A month. Yeah.
For just the supplemental Part B.
Exactly.
And these are fixed income people, most of them.
Right. You're elderly, over 65, or you're disabled.
Yeah.
So I kind of was laughing when he said that. And then seeing what the administration was doing after that, not just putting out policies that were very pro-insurance company, which is understandable to a point. And I'm going to say that as the success of Obamacare, honestly, has to do with the fact that there are plans out there to take people. And they can't turn them down because they have the pre-existing condition. So they fixed that. But the problem was that if you make them so expensive, then what's the patient going to do? And
it's exclusion by offering. It's not actually,
right.
I mean, if it's unaffordable, then, we jokingly refer to it as the Unaffordable Healthcare Act these days because it's almost impossible to afford it for somebody who needs it.
Yeah, Dana Kuhn used to make the joke that it's the Almost Affordable Care Act. But because of the dislike, then there was an interest, as we know, through the Department of Justice.
Right.
Now, I'm not defending or I'm not accusing. So all of a sudden then, not only Congress started taking a cold shoulder towards patient assistance and the administration, but they were really looking at through a Department of Justice lens. And
which precipitated a number of lawsuits.
Yes. Well, I would say that the person who probably brought it on was the gentleman who ran I can't think of their name. Martin Shkreli, Pharma Dude. He was the one who bought a generic and jacked. Yes, or it wasn't a generic, but it was a long off patent product that then that for toxoplasmosis, Daraprim, and jacked the price up. I forget 2,000, 10,000%. Whatever it was. The problem that I worked at the patient assistance organization, who he came to do patient assistance for it. And so I think that brought, it started shining us, that event, what he was doing, and then the mitigation factors after it led to, I know, Congress and especially the administration to shine a light on those programs. So I don't...
And specifically, there was a narrative that was starting to form that said that the reason why drug prices were high was because it was being propped up by financial assistance.
Exactly.
The problem that we saw almost immediately was that we're working with patients day in and day out and day in and day out, is that whether drug prices are high or increasing or not, that it's there. First of all, you can't draw a direct correlation. Number one, that's a factually incorrect summarization. However, there's another element to this too, is that we were seeing patients come in and day out, like the ones that we just mentioned, and others who could not afford to keep their life-saving medications coming to them because they couldn't afford the insurance that would pay to keep that coverage. And so even if there is a tie to there being some sort of moderately elevated levels of cost, that doesn't solve the issue that patients can't afford it or can't access their life-saving medications either way. And so this is a problem whether it had to do with the narrative itself was incorrect, but the narrative started to really impede with the ability of patient assistance organizations to be able to do the work that we had done, which was still good work.
Exactly. And I think this is an important thing, and I think it's important with HOPE, is to make sure that we're going in there and saying, is the patient needs to go in and say, this is my life if I don't get this assistance. And that's how I was trying, that's how always I looked at it. Well, because to a group of policymakers, well, where do they go? That's the question I always asked. Well, okay, what should they do now? Okay, they can't get patient assistance, or you're not going to they don't have to have their premium accepted or their copay accepted. What should they do now? I mean, and that was always the $1 million question of people are like, no, you're right. But so getting to this, so it was definitely a change. The Affordable Care Act changed minds. I think part of it was insurance companies are the linchpin. And the administration, whoever administration, was always going to have to lean to their side because it doesn't work if insurance companies do not participate. So in the early days, when the website's crashing in 2014, I mean, I think we're in, where were you at? I think we're out in Anaheim.
Yeah.
We're at the NHF when this is all starting about to come online.
Right.
And the website's crashing, and patients can't get on to do their open enrollment.
Yeah, we'd have people like sitting on the computer, literally just waiting to try to click it again, and like we would get in like 3, 4 at a time, and then all of a sudden you couldn't get anything in for hours, and then it would like again you get like a little window. It was the craziest thing. It was like Y2K, but but actually,
it's only people's health.
That's right.
So. I remember, I remember it. I remember those days, very vividly. And then all of a sudden, in probably November, they put out this. When I say they, the Department of Health and Human Services put out this very vague bulletin, and the vague bulletin says, "We really don't encourage premium assistance from for-profit entities or medical providers like hospitals." We were thinking. Okay, well, no big deal. We did a letter saying, please be clear next time, and please say you're not targeting nonprofit organizations. That's what we did. A letter, sent it in early January, and then they came out again a couple weeks after that with a very detailed analysis another FAQ, I would say, that was very clear that they were not targeting nonprofit organizations.
That's good.
Yeah, I have all these documents. I'm like,
right.
But then like a month later. It was very. I guess what happened was the insurance company here in Louisiana Blue Cross Blue Shield, said that they were not going to accept third-party assistance from the ADAP program, the AIDS Drug Assistance Program, and that was a big deal.
Right.
And so that's why the Department of Health and Human Services came in and said, no, you have to accept third-party assistance from the AIDS Drug Assistance Program. And then the same thing, Indian Health Service, I guess up in North Dakota, where there's a large Native American population, Blue Cross Blue Shield in North Dakota said, we're not going to accept Indian Health Service dollars. So they made a big, this part one of this FAQ said you have to accept from both Indian Health Service and Indian tribes and state ADAPs. And then on the back, I say it's the back. Question 2 was on nonprofit organizations, and they said you need to accept from nonprofit organizations as long as they keep the person on for the plan year. I had personally some problems with that because I know a lot of people we help sometimes it's just for a couple months between group plans or such. So I'm like, But then I always say this: the rule comes out. So March of 2014, CMS issues this interim rule that tells the insurance companies you must accept third-party premium and cost-sharing assistance from government entities, and they spell them out. The State AIDS Drug Assistance Programs, ADAP, Brian White, which talk about pitting groups against each other.
Right.
And then Indian tribes and tribal organizations and any other state or federal program. And what was interesting when I was with PSI is we received state funding from several states, South Carolina, Virginia, Kentucky. And so because we were, our contractor was the state, they actually had to accept our third-party assistance for those programs. They were for bleeding disorders patients in those states. The problem moving forward, though, it was very odd, right? Those were protected, but the rule is very clear. It says, but if you are an entity, you can have a contractual prohibition on accepting third-party assistance from any other entities. Any other entities. Any. So not just nonprofit organizations like PSI or Hope Charities or where I was at the time, but if our Little Sisters of the Poor or the
civic organizations,
the
right?
Rotarians, I can't go a day without watching the Shriner commercials on television or St. Jude's,
Right.
and not see, this is where this is very interesting to me. If you grabbed an insurance company and said, oh, they would say, oh, we're being forced to by the government. Because the first letter we got was Louisiana Blue Cross Blue Shield. They sent us a letter saying, we're not going to accept this from your patients anymore. So I got on a call with them and I said, I honestly believe that they thought it was Christmas morning because they were very excited. We don't have to accept your payment anymore. The government says we don't have to. So this started off, and now it's got an 8-year odyssey for me on this issue, because the government shouldn't have done that. I mean, I hate to sound like I'm a 3-year-old, but the government should not have allowed insurance companies to allow anybody to deny a check they got, a fair check that's written from an entity on behalf of a patient. If you're a government that is compassionate to a human being who's getting assisted through a charity, who's getting assistance through a church, whose next door neighbor wants to write the check, who they want to have a bake sale for somebody. These are one-offs, but why should the government stop that?
Right.
And so, just on a philosophical nature, on a free, fair society where we want to treat others like ourselves, that should not be there. So that's what's basically fueled my passion about this
which really was born out of the Market Access Project, which was what started from
so that's
assistance, but really kind of turned into this coalition of
organizations. Far away from that.
No, it's great. It's actually part of the journey and the timeline that turned into this coalition of organizations that's now called United for Charitable Assistance, that's still working on this issue, and basically just saying, I remember one of the first, marketing campaigns that we tried to do with Market Access was about, let charitable bees be charitable, and that was a huge move to try to change the narrative.
Actually, let charities be charitable was Kevin Kramer. So, so in 2014, 2015, as I trudged up to Capitol Hill, and I want to preface all this by saying this is the real tragedy of COVID. Mm-hmm. Not that we've lost 1 million people. That's a tragedy. My wife lost her father but you can't get up there anymore and look people face in the eye and start talking to these problems. Right. Zoom just doesn't cut it for me.
Right.
I'm look me in the eye. Let's have this conversation kind of guy. So I went to every member of the Energy and Commerce Committee and I said, this shouldn't stand. And there was a lot of ambiguity. A lot of offices said, "Oh, that's not what they mean." So let's let it go for a couple of months. That's not what they mean. The head of CMS at the time was the former health secretary in Virginia, where the group I worked for was based. So we had a little bit of a relationship with her. Got Marilyn Tabner. My boss, Dana Kuhn at the time, he costed her on a train back to Richmond. And Dana, that's not what we meant to do. But they never changed it. They never. Right. So there was a little bit at the time was, okay, well, how do we get this fixed? This had to be a mistake.
Right.
Which we learned it really wasn't a mistake. And for 8 years now, the insurance companies have basically about to run amok with it. Right. I knew as we started fighting it too, they've looked for other avenues of how they can really. At the end of the day, the problem arises that people with rare chronic conditions take expensive medications. The insurance company doesn't want to pay for it. The pharmaceutical company doesn't want to cut the price, and the patient's really stuck in the middle, and they're a ping pong. Now,
but the patient has a seat at the table, and
yes,
I think that this is where it really comes down to advocacy is vital, is that the patient actually is, for lack of a better way to say it, they're a stakeholder.
Yes.
They have the ability to say, this is what is going to save my life, this is what's not going to save my life, and they have a voice. I think if patients understood that, and especially in volume, we could really change the narrative.
Yes, and it has. And there's nothing is ever going to stop bringing a group of constituents into a member of Congress, sitting down and having them tell their story. Just this is what I go through. This is why I get assistance. I've seen it. That works. The problem is the coordinated effort, and the problem also is, like when I worked at in charities, we can't give campaign contributions, but the insurance companies can.
Right.
The dialysis centers can.
Right.
And I made a point of keeping the pharmaceutical companies as far away from us as possible because I didn't want to walk into the insurance companies' criticisms that which they would go up to Capitol Hill and say, these organizations are false fronts for manufacturers, which I had to laugh, and I don't want to seem flip about it, but I had to laugh because I've seen how these programs are funded. You're borrowing, and how's that? Pleading for people for an extra dime for these programs. We're not, and to say that oh, these are false fronts, or I used to laugh. I used to make all kind of flip. I used to be really flip about it because, and it was frustrating because I said, that's not how this works. I mean, this is what the insurance companies will tell you how it works, but this isn't how it works.
And they have a mountain of money to make a narrative
they've done that.
Sound sexy, but it's really, in essence, it's just a narrative that is mostly entirely false. It's self-serving at the absolute least to their need, but it actually puts the patient themselves in danger because it could be preventative for a patient to even remain, to be able to get their drugs.
Yes. And my favorite was one time that we were in a meeting with the Blue Cross Blue Shield Association and AHIP and with the committee staff. All of us were going to sit around the table and see if we can't come to some agreement. And a woman from the Blue Cross Blue Shield Association said, these programs, patient assistance, hurt patients.
What?
Several people said that they felt they had to hold me back so I didn't go flying across the table. I don't think it was that bad. I wanted to. I did say, how you can say that with a straight face is kind of, but there's a reason why they said it, and it was very interesting. And there might have actually been a little bit of truth in her statement because of the problem that we have is that you have rare disease groups and then you have end-stage renal disease, which is totally paid for and run differently. And so there is some interesting...
Yeah, there are some bigger groups that are anomalies, I think, that have gotten a bad rap, and that has also kind of spilled its way over into helping more I hate to say the general population of rare disease kind of has been tainted because of some of these anomalies, but there are some things out there that I think are of legitimate concern that we should say, okay, maybe that should be addressed in itself, but that is not the whole issue. I mean, you got, 72 million people now that have a diagnosis of a rare disease, and you have end-stage renal disease, which kind of stands on its own. Now, it's got a lot of financial support and its own set of circumstances that are very unique to themselves.
Very unique circumstances.
But that narrative really spilled over to affect the other 60 million people that it doesn't affect.
And I can take a lot of blame for that because they were working on a state level, and I was trying to build a coalition to get this at first. Reached out to the American Kidney Fund. Hey, let's work together. And almost from immediately realized they are just not a nice partner to work with. But I want to leave it at that. This is a positive. This is a positive thing. So I'll say that. There was never really let's all work together. It's you've done such a good job, Mr. Romano. Let the grown-ups take over.
Wow.
We don't need a bill. Hillary Clinton's going to become president. She's going to fix everything.
Oh my
Okay. Yeah, how's that work?
That's when you slap your Ricky Ray bill up on the wall and plaster it over their thing and say, you know what? We have a long history of seeing massive things change.
But I will say this: it's the insurance companies have really muddied the waters. Now, I'm at this point trying to figure out where, I think like I said, COVID's been a real problem because I'm just not able to do what I was able to do before. But I went to meet with every member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, and I found a champion. Kevin Kramer. He was a congressman from North Dakota, and now he's a senator from North Dakota. But getting back really to UCA, when the problems started occurring with the Department of Justice, some of the groups said to me, having a patient assistance organization as the front and center face of this is not helpful right now. And internally, there was internal changes at the patient assistance organization. I didn't think they wanted to run it anymore. So I think it was a good marriage that we moved it over. Not only MAP, it was the Marketplace Access Project. It wasn't just going to be that. We're going to work on any kind of attack on a patient getting any kind of assistance, whether it's third-party premium assistance through the rule, the HHS rule, or is it accumulators, or is it now? There was several kind of issues running up. There's one with ERISA plans that plans were cutting out all specialty products and having patients go onto free product programs.
Right.
And fought
Which
that.
Which works for an incredibly short amount of time, if it works at all.
Right.
And it wasn't established or created to be something for people to live off of for sure. And it really is a failure, disaster waiting to happen.
Oh, yes. And I saw it in the cystic fibrosis community. And what happened was there was a patient who was a father with two daughters who had cystic fibrosis, which we both the daughters. And so, so right before COVID, there was I guess Vertex. I think it was Vertex came out with their new cystic fibrosis treatment, which is amazing. Which I heard throughout COVID have kept patients out of the hospitals for the first times in their lives. I mean, this was a miracle.
Wow!
And this self-insured plan wanted to cut out all specialty drugs, and they wanted to put them back on some older therapies and not this new frontline therapy, because the patient assistance program at the manufacturer, the free drug program at the one manufacturer, offered it to, if you have, see, a lot of these programs, as you know, works if they only help you if you do not have insurance.
Right.
But some of them do have a quirk that if you have coverage, but the coverage doesn't cover your treatment, then you can, then they'll give it to you also compassionately. Eventually, they got the treatment that they needed because it didn't work. Because
right.
as soon as the free product
it took activation though from the patients though. It really was about them raising the issue and saying, "Hey, this isn't working for us. Like you can't do this." And if I'm not mistaken, I don't know if it was that one or another situation because we've seen a few of these. But the employer, I think, eventually kind of decided to take a different route.
Employers. So
it was great that he was willing to do the right thing, but this happens really at all layers, including the business side, but the self-insured side. But it happens that we're seeing these types of decisions that aren't fully calculated on how it impacts everyone who's involved.
Absolutely,
even all the way to the federal level, including the CMS ruling that came through and prohibited these things.
Yes, so absolutely. And then there's companies that are performing out there, and wherever there is a dollar to be made, there's always going to be a company that comes out and thinks, how am I going to do this? On how to help companies, advise companies on how to save money on their healthcare costs, which is always going to be very attractive to a company, large or small. Well, if you're self-insured, you're usually a large company. on how to reduce those costs.
Right.
And I understand that because sometimes any raises can be lost then paying for your health. You might get a 10% raise, but your health care goes up 12%. I mean, I understand behind it, there are very good intentions. Sometimes they just don't iron themselves out correctly.
Right.
And I mean, I've seen this, and I'm sure you've seen this in your life. I've seen it in my life. The change when you have a change in your health insurance, I'll still never forget. Carolee was due with our twins in March of 2013, and then but they changed on January 1st. Our insurance changed, and we had already you already paid for the baby to be born.
Right.
Well, I was like, I hate to tell you this, Mrs. Romano, when she went in for her first doctor's appointment afterwards, but we have to actually charge you more now to have them. And it was a real interesting that happens all the time. But it was just kind of a funny story, but it happens to everybody.
Right.
But
you are advocating for everybody out of pocket costs for health.
Carolee came home from the doctor's office that day. She's like, I can't believe PSI should have the best insurance because they're always helping. I was like, oh, here we go. Oh boy, here we go. So UCA right now is working to get these bills reintroduced. So we had introduced a bill with, when Congressman Kramer was in the House, and I always say it's always easier to get a bill introduced in the House. There's just lots more people to work with. He was the newest member on the Energy and Commerce Committee. He did not have a health care issue. He got very excited, and we worked to introduce it. He's done letters. I think, like I said, though, COVID has been a really bad impact on this. People are just not introducing bills like they used to. I mean, in certain cases they are, but putting together a coalition is difficult in keeping things alive.
Well, it's hard, just the practicality of it, even to get patients to go to the Hill. Like, it's just not happening.
It's just not happening.
It's all on Zoom, and it's just a different thing now.
So if I took you to the Hill today, the easiest part is they'd meet with you, but we would go in. It would just be you and I, or up to 5 people. We would have to go in, do the meeting, and then leave, and then come in again, sign it. Like, we can't hang out in the cafeteria and see who walks by. It's none of that.
Wow.
And so it makes it very difficult. So it doesn't make it worth your while. And they're not going to meet with Jim Romano, lobbyist. They're going to meet with, obviously Jonathan James if he's a constituent or he's from the state. I took a group last summer, I think on the hottest day of the year. So after we would leave, it'd be like sweating outside, waiting for and it was frustrating. It was sad and it was frustrating. And it wasn't, and someone masked, some didn't, it became very, it worked itself out. It was great. We got some great footage for Chronic Disease Day and such, but it wasn't the same. And I feel bad. I mean, I can't wait till we get past that because then I'm raring to go because I like to.
Wow. So tell me a little bit about. I think that it's important for people to understand because what we're working on with United for Charitable Assistance, what you've been working on for a long time, is we've talked a lot about sort of this third-party payer issue. And, no matter how it came about, we're still dealing with it. Yep. And so I do want to kind of zero in on this. And one of the questions that I wrote was just like, let's talk about the threats of financial assistance being accessible for people living with rare disease and chronic conditions as it pertains to this third-party prohibition issue. Because what I don't feel like, as I talk to patients in the broader sense of the community, whether they're getting help from maybe, say, a PAN Foundation or PSI or Accessia or a Hope or whatever the organization is that they're getting assistance from, if they're able to get that even, because a lot of those programs open and close. Sometimes they have money, sometimes they don't. That's a whole nother set of issues. But let's just say hypothetically, they know they have a problem. They know they're going to lose their coverage if they don't get help. They do go through the steps to get help, and then they qualify, and then they're able to get it when it is open. There's a lot of hurdles before they get to this. Then they've still got this element of this looming, it could be potentially prevented by their insurance company to even receive the third-party assistance at all. And so I don't feel like that this is one of those things that patients largely are aware of, and I don't feel like that it's something that is known, and it is a very real threat that I think that we should be very, very perturbed by or
Yes,
activated to do something
exactly.
about.
And and you've lived it a lot worse than I have.
Yeah.
Because, but that's a story for a different day. What I would go back and say is, it's interesting again with COVID that I think we're in a lull right now, and we have been for COVID because we're not. I know that when I was at the company when the company I was at, the first sign of a problem with an insurer, the first letter, then they would block off that insurer the whole time. So anybody who was on that, I guess what they would do is they would go to a reimbursement if they could possibly, or it would go to a reimbursement almost immediately. So you have to put up the money and then we'll reimburse you. And so I think that what I was always concerned about, though, is if you look back at some of the contracts, they're very clear that if the insurance company determines that you're receiving an assistance or on the third part on the back end, that they can still cancel your policy and sue you for insurance fraud. So I think from a certain aspect, it's gotten itself into like equilibrium right now, whereas they're not really pushing people off like they were in 2014, 15, 16. I mean, that was a big deal, 17. And so they've lulled the patient groups to sleep. Well, it's not that big of a deal anymore. And I'm trying to say is it only takes one company to say, hey, there's this obscure rule that we can, and we can do this. So let's start. So that's why I still think the law has to be changed, because just because you've hit an equilibrium point for a couple of years because of a worldwide pandemic does not mean that we should not fix this.
Right.
I understand.
And it's really because the law doesn't speak to it directly, right? I mean, it's not as much that this is kind of one of those gap things that it's like it doesn't say that it's illegal to get third party assistance,
Right.
and it doesn't say that you have to get it unless it's one of these entitlements.
Well,
But
you
there's
have
this
to
gap.
accept it.
Right, and there's
insurance
this
company.
gap. I mean, I think it was Elizabeth Warren that wrote a letter several years ago
Yes,
that said
that
it
was-
was like an $8 billion a year industry or something like that for financial assistance. I mean, she came up with some absurd number that was way higher than what I could ever calculate was actually happening. But at the end of the day, it's still a very, very large amount of assistance that is happening.
And she wanted just to cut it off.
and she wanted to cut it.
Yeah, she wanted the federal government, and see that's the dangerous thing here, and that's why it's part of United for Charitable Assistance. One of the aspects, and we've been Congress really doesn't care, like in trying to sit down and talk to them about it. But everything here is the whole idea of charitable assistance is all put together through one office at the Department of Health and Human Services, and that is the Office of Inspector General. And they could cut it off tomorrow, and what would happen? Like Elizabeth Warren sending that letter, yes,
Thousands of people would not
tens
be
of
able,
thousands of
right,
people
would not have access to life-saving medications that they currently have access to because these programs exist. They would be cut off instantly. And you know what would happen is if we started to go to the hill at that point, it's too late.
Too late.
It's too late. It's
Exactly.
the damage has been done, and it would take years to get it cranked back up again. I mean, years to recover from that. And so there's some things that preventative treatment is the only treatment, and I believe this third-party payer issue is one of those.
That's exactly how I feel. And I've run into people in our own community who accuse me of poking the bear, of making the insurance companies upset at you. I'm like, you can say that but it's still happening.
change the problem.
It doesn't change the problem.
That's
It's still happening. It was expanding. At one point, Blue Cross Blue Shield in Florida had said, we're not going to accept third-party assistance for their supplemental plan, which as a business decision was actually fairly smart.
So does it really come down to the fact that these insurance companies just have a mountain of money?
Yep.
They have the ability to send as much control to the narrative, donate to all of these things. But is it really an issue of the fact that they have more influence on the narrative and it's a business decision for them to try to cut these things. And politically speaking, it's too difficult to kind of deal with, and it doesn't seem like there's enough of an outcry from a grassroots effort that they're not hearing feedback to say there's all these people that are damaged by it, so therefore they're not motivated to make a policy decision because of that. I mean, to me, it feels like that there, and again, this comes back to preventative treatment can be the only treatment in certain instances. I do believe that we're sitting here on the precipice of this being such a problem, and once it happens, it's too late to fix it. And that is that if we were able to get from a grassroots swell enough people to be able to say, hey, we're aware this is a problem and this better not happen or else my kid's going to die. I'm going to die. Somebody's going to die because we're going to literally not be able to get access to our medications. Is it that there is a need for that to sort of balance out the opposite narrative, which is, see, we're doing this. It's the pot in the kettle, right? It's the frog in the kettle, I should say. It's like it's the turning up 1 degree of heat every now and eventually, the frog dies because he didn't even know it was being turned up.
Right. Exactly. I happen to agree with you. The way I look at it similarly, it's getting more and more grassroots people into it because the ultimate question for every member of Congress is, well, what do you want us to? If you want to shut this down, then what is your alternative? Now, the Democrats will tell you, and their alternative is all single payer healthcare,
Right.
that, and that's the problem with this, because
Right.
that's what their answer is. Well, and that's where I come back with, well, until you get to that point, you can't just shut this down.
That's right.
And so that. And then the Republicans aspect is, well, it was always a.
But if that were true, arguably though, if that were true, you made this point earlier, is that why are there so many of these programs that are supporting people who are already on the program that they want to make the single payer? If you want to go Medicare for all, fine. But guess what? 60% of the patients that Accessia and PAN and all these groups are helping are on Medicare currently.
Yes.
So does that even eliminate the need for the supplemental help, even if? And I think that this is a problem.
And it's sanctioned. I mean, it's sanctioned and fairly regulated in the Medicare program. I mean, obviously, I think there should be physical regulations on patient assistance through HHS and not just OIG. But, I mean, on Medicare Part D, nobody's been talking about. I mean, obviously, Elizabeth Warren wants to shut down. Someone want to shut down, but I'll never forget, they wanted these programs, CMS, in 2004, 2005, when the Medicare Part D benefit was coming on track. They wanted these programs.
We were the white knight. Yes. We were the ones being the helpful hero.
Yes, we're going to help you we're going to wrap around those, do wraparound assistance for all of those policies, and you're going to be happy about it. And they were.
Right.
So, like I said, it's
all kind of come out of this, like, oh, well, the reason for high cost drugs is because these assistants exist, and that is absolutely not only just a false narrative. It's actually been it should have been. I mean, it's harmful.
Yeah.
It's very harmful,
and there's a couple of problems
not true.
Here. So, and I'm going to say, and this is going to be a little controversial. So you have pharma, you have bio. You have PPTA, you have AHIP. These are all trade associations come together to represent segments of the economy in the health space. There's no trade association for patient assistance organizations, which there should be, and they should be paying, and there should be somebody out there, refuting all this. It should not totally be up to the patient to do it. But I totally agree with that. But there should be a trade association that's funded through those organizations to put that together. So number two, when looking at when it's also when what you just said is we're in this in between period. And you're right. Now's the opportunity to get the patient voice out there also saying, well, what am I supposed to do? What's my next step if you're going to end these programs for me?
Right.
Which is an important thing to do. And so I think moving forward, there's some concrete organizations should start putting together processes to get their patients involved and talking about this. And that's what we're trying to do at UCA. But it's trying to organize, give people the information to get their patient groups involved and patients out there. And so hopefully, like right now, we're working on Arizona. It's to get the Arizona senators to work with Senator Kramer. So we'll be working with the groups there but they have to want to. And some of them, most don't have the infrastructure
Yeah.
to push a button and get there, and it's helping them build that too.
So I mean, let's just stop right here because I do think this is a great time to give a plug. I mean, if somebody's listening to this right now and they're thinking, "Gosh, well, I got a story. I'd love to be able to share why my life depends on maintaining access to this medication, or my child's life depends on me maintaining access to this medication, and the cost of my health care is so high, it's very difficult, and I've gone through months or job changes or COBRA or whatever it is where I needed to get assistance from one of these programs, for copay or for premium assistance or what have you, or I can at least understand those who need it. If they're listening to this right now and they want to get involved, I mean, what is the best thing for them to do?
They need to call Hope Charities, and they need to talk to Joe Ferguson here on the staff. He will put you in contact with UCA, and hopefully we'll have you contact. We'll find out who your congressman is.
Yeah.
We'll have you. We'll set up a meeting. We'll help you email the staff person afterwards. We can help here at Hope really organize the patients who listen to this who want to be involved.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, and I always, this is what always got into my head. If you interviewed every American, this is a 95-5 issue. 95% of Americans are going to want access to those programs because they don't know what's going to happen to them tomorrow.
Right.
I mean, who knows what tomorrow will bring?
It's a safety net.
Yes. So they're going to want to make sure their child has access to that.
Yes.
So I always say the 5% who'd be against it work for the insurance industry. But this is one of those issues that this isn't a political issue, really. Right. Because if you brought any average American, I remember talking about this at my sister's wedding with people going, "What do you mean I can't get assistance?"
Right.
This isn't a thing that is controversial, other than the fact that some of the organizations were a little controversial the last couple of years because of Department of Justice. Other than that, it's not a controversial.
An extreme minority, by the
right?
way.
Exactly.
Extreme minority.
Exactly.
And those things have been dealt with.
And those things have been dealt with. And so, but that's what angers me is if we stopped people driving by and asked them, "Do you think you should have be able to have access to charitable assistance?" Every one of them is going to say yes.
Yeah.
This is not something that this is a man-made problem that the insurance industry has pushed.
Absolutely. It's kind of like driving down the road and you see somebody that has a flat tire. And, let's say, for instance, you're the one with the flat tire, right? And it's kind of hard enough to imagine that somebody's going to stop. I mean, these days, people don't stop to help anymore because it seems like everybody has roadside assistance. So it's hard to get somebody to stop anyway. Right. But you see 1, 2, 3 cars that stop by. And you think, oh, well, could you help me? And they don't. But you're like, man, I'm really in need. I can't turn this thing or whatever. And my roadside assistance is like saying that they're 5 hours out and whatever. And it's like you finally get somebody that's willing to stop and give you help.
Right.
And you're desperate and you're thanking God that somebody finally pulled over and says, "Hey, can I help you?" And you're like, "Yes, thank you so much." And a police officer pulls up and says, "No, you can't do that. You have to leave the scene. You cannot help them change their tire. And I won't help you either," and leaves.
Right.
That, in essence, is what's being done.
Yes.
It is one thing. Yeah. It is one thing for you to say that you got to find your own help and hope that somebody stops to help you. It's a completely different, I believe, arguably moral issue and obligation that the government has chosen to stand in the way of you getting assistance.
Exactly.
And that is criminal. That should be outlawed.
Yes.
And yet it's precipitating today, and its potential is even more egregious than that.
It's metastasized.
Absolutely.
It really, I never thought it would metastasize, and it has. I thought,
So why aren't people furious about this, Jim?
That is an excellent question.
I think it's partially because they don't know.
Well, they don't know, and then they hear the jibber jabber of, well, these are these are dirty. Somebody called it a dirty Band-Aid, and I was like,
what?
Patient assistance organizations, and they're given a platform. in Congress, Dana Kuhn wanted to testify 1,000,000 times about patient assistance in front of Congress,
Right.
and they didn't want him. But they want to bring in, they are stacked against this. Again, if there was a trade association that they can, okay, we're going to have the head of the patient assistant APAP or whatever you want to call it come testify along with AHIP and Blue Cross Association. That'd be, I think that's the problem is it's not organized.
I would still argue, right or wrong, that ultimately the even if we have, let's say, a trade association,
Right.
first of all, you pull all the money together that all the organizations have that are going to contribute to this association. You've got its own. Now you create a pool of politics within itself.
Well,
which
I
we're
believe me,
already kind of not on
that's
a
the
unified
problem.
front to
Yes,
begin with.
Right.
I also think, though, and I was in financial planning for a number of years, decade, and I'm in that field. I remember looking through so many things just on a purely financial level. We're never going to have as much in our trade association as we would in the insurance association. So we still end up at the same inroad in a sense where you've got a mountain of money that has a narrative against you, and then you've got another association that has less money and has less ability and resources to have a narrative produced that's in response.
Versus that there's no entity now. There's little entities. There's little. I'm not a little anything, but there's a little advocates here.
No one has ever called me little in my whole life.
Exactly. Not a little
I
anything.
take offense to that. Don't call me little.
Individuals.
There you go.
Just say that live from side out. You're not a little anything. You have these smaller entities and individuals who are fighting the fight like you and I.
Yeah.
With very little resources behind
Right.
us. And that's the
none.
problem here.
Right.
And
But here's the kicker. We really have all the resources. Because at the end of the day, I think that there's only 3 people that have a seat at the table.
Right.
Okay? Call me crazy, call me wrong, I don't know. But I think there's only 3 people that have a seat at the table when it comes to this whole issue of getting drugs, getting through the process of having access to medication, all this stuff. And that is the physician, the patient, and the payer. That's it. The payer is only one of those people.
right.
The physician is only one of those people. Guess what? The patients collectively are also one of those people. And we have an equal voice, or should have, I should say, an equal voice at the table. But it takes getting organized. I think that's important. But I would also say it takes an outcry. It takes a lot of people from a lot of places to rise up. Mm-hmm. And I believe that this is an issue that we're going to have to continue to talk about and to continue to get elevated in our conversations, because there's a lot of noise out there. And look, we're going to talk about the accumulator issue here in a minute, but I do believe that the accumulator issue is a problem that needs to be addressed. There is momentum dealing with the accumulator adjuster program, but while that is its own sort of issue, there is momentum heading in a positive way. Third party has been here probably before accumulators being an issue, and yet it has had much less momentum because people are like, well, it's really If I hear one more person say, well, you see, I don't know if it's just like, I just want to just get up and walk out because I'm so tired. And I know you are too, of hearing people really dilute the fact that this is a problem. But to me, the third party issue is different than the accumulator in the sense that to me, the third party issue is kind of like, I think of it kind of like falling off a cliff. It's like once you fall off that cliff, there's no going back to the cliff. Like you can't get back on top. Like
right.
you have literally you're dead. It's over. But with the accumulator issue, there's stages of problems that can be corrected, that you can sort of fight through. And I'm very, very much aware of the accumulator problem. It is an issue that needs to be addressed. I do believe there's progress being made there.
Oh, there's lots of progress.
Third party is like a cliff, and we are very close to the edge of that cliff in a way that I don't think that the larger patient population is aware of as they need to be, and that is also part of the problem because not enough people are rising up to say they're
why. So the accumulator issue. Why is the accumulator issue more popular than third party? And there's an easy explanation for that. The accumulator issue deals with the copay card that comes directly from the manufacturer. So they are in a direct financial position of why they want to see it fixed. quickly.
Okay.
So several manufacturers, and this is great, and I wish to God I could emulate this in some way. They come up with this great idea: is we're going to find a great group in a state. Because I know, on different issues, the company I left did this with the manufacturer, and we're going to give you money, and you're going to run a coalition for us in that state, and we're going to pay for the lobbyist, and we're going to pay for you to do social media, and you get to keep a part of that for your,
Overhead
overhead
to run the program.
So they do that. And then so that's why this is so successful. Why you have these state coalitions there's one in Pennsylvania right now that's run by the Immune Deficiency Foundation, and there's one in Ohio right now, and there's there's several going on. There's one in Texas next year, but behind that is money,
Right.
and they pick an organization and they say you have to build a coalition. And they help you build the coalition. And they because I actually tried to emulate this with MAP and then with UCA, but I don't have the pharmaceutical money behind me. I just had the money of
Constituents,
of the patient advocacy group, who was willing to fund it. First, it was the patient assistance organization. Now it was a patient advocacy group. So that's why those are so successful, because and they do a lot of great work.
Sure.
I knew the lobbyist, Kelly Fitzgerald, who passed the one in Virginia.
Right.
I mean, but she was, she was being paid by industry to
Sure.
put together the...
Well, because they have a direct interest. I think they also should have a direct interest in this too. But the bottom line is that, I think, you bring up a great point about again, it goes back to this mountain of money idea. Mm-hmm. You have the insurers who have, let's just call it $100. So just for kicks and giggles to keep things simple, they have $100. Right. You've got pharma that comes in to support accumulator, which is $10, right. And then you've got us down here at third party that are really probably
doing
inevitably could potentially be a much bigger problem to the masses of people who are dependent upon these systems that have $1.
Exactly.
And so until that changes, it's going to be hard. But I am a sucker. I mean, like such a sucker for underdog story, right?
Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
Yeah. It really is this idea that, oh my gosh, the one guy came out of Rocky. You've got
I grew up in Philadelphia, so I love my Rocky stories. Yeah, I just watched Rocky the other day.
There you go. So all 12 of them. But there's
I stopped after 4.
25 Rockies later, and we're all still thinking about Rocky. But that's the point, though, is that there's a place, though, where there could be an uprising. There could be, if we could get on the same page and elevate the issue enough. And look, with social media has been a great equalizer in this.
John, I'm gonna
go ahead.
We did. We came out of nowhere. We found a sponsor. He dropped the bill. We got 200. I mean, we've
made momentum.
We've made momentum, and it got stopped. And I'm trying to to this day figure out where we got stopped so badly.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. But I think you're right. I think we're poised to do it again.
Right.
We just have to find, because this has really inspired me today, because it made me think of back to the Ricky Ray bill, and it's literally pounding the pavement, but we can't freaking pound the pavement now.
You're pounding the pavement with the pavement being pulled out from underneath you. Yes. That's what's happened.
That's the problem.
It's the rug being pulled out from you that you can't help.
It's. I used to go office to office.
This is a new generation, and it's a new day.
Yes.
And there's new creative ways that we can reach people. Right. And it doesn't have to look like it did once upon a time. And I think that this is what is interesting about this environment that we're in now, is that there are things that the average everyday person can do. Mm-hmm. But it starts with you saying, I believe this is important, and I'm going to speak up about it.
Right.
And if it doesn't start there is no start at all. Right. And you've done a fantastic job of organizing and getting us together to talk about this issue, to really try to get into the weeds of this. You've put legislation that's been proposed in place. You've put all kinds of things. And let's go to the end of this. In some ways, is that you have a bill, right? I mean, UCA has a bill, and we're trying to get it moved through. There's still some steps in front of us that we
Yes.
have to get through. But what could help, I think, again, is the uprising of the voice. If the voice from the ground would rise up, this thing could change, and it could protect patients.
Exactly.
Even if we're talking about single payer at the end of the road, it still is going to be needed. We've already proven that 60% of the people that are on the assistance are getting that anyway.
Right,
So
exactly.
whether or not that's the narrative or not doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, if there was an uprising, I think we have a position that we can still. We just need a little bit of
yes.
fuel, a little bit of a spark, and this
Actually,
thing could
yeah,
light on
it's getting
fire.
the patient. It's working with you to say, okay, so here's Arizona. It's getting together and saying, okay, let's get some Arizona patients to meet with Senator Kelly. I took a former PSI board member, Dr. Nance. I don't know if you know
Danielle Nance.
So we and she went through her. I mean, but we have to keep doing that, and I mean, that's what made the difference. It's Dr. Nance wants to, she talked to as a physician, as you said it best, as a physician and as a patient and as a recipient at one point.
Yeah.
I mean, her story is wonderful. I mean, I
Right.
love Danielle; she's phenomenal. And so it's getting that, because as my business associate Dana always says, make them say no to their constituents, because that's not a fun feeling. Even if you have to say it, that's not fun.
Right.
Because when they leave, how many people are they going to say? Oh, yeah, well, you.
Right.
But
So you're right. Getting the person, the constituent, to face their congressman or senator and let them tell you, no, we're not going to support. That's a hard conversation.
That's a hard
for them to have.
I know. It's funny. Garrett Graves is a great example. He does not love the third party payer issue, and he'll be very clear about it.
Right.
But he supported it because
At the end of the day,
you're the constituent. You're the organization's based in his district,
right.
and he feels some obligation to do that because he knows that these patients, he knows
It meets a need. It meets a need that cannot be met really any other way.
It does.
And I think we've continued to communicate that as efficiently and effectively as we can. I think that something that is also important to talk about here is, so going back, you said that if people want to get involved, they can obviously call Hope Charities, and Joe Ferguson is a great person to talk to because he is kind of compiling this data and helping us to put all this together. And so you can email him. We'll make sure that his links are down in the links below so that you can communicate with him directly. But also I would just say that another way to do that is to go to your local organizations that you're already involved with. If it's maybe say your local chapter or your local civic groups, maybe that may be aware of this issue, or different places, as well as even national organizations that are dealing with some of these things. I think that it is important to be involved with the people who are connected to the issues that you're mostly wanting to help with. And so, there are organizations out there that are working very fervently on the accumulator adjuster issue, and I think that that's still an important thing that we need to speak up about.
Absolutely.
And so I don't want to
if you're in
demean that per se.
Ohio,
There's definitely
absolutely.
a huge need for that. And so I know that there's a lot of momentum there. NHF and HFA have done a fantastic job of being able to move that needle and continue to move that ball down the court. I know Gwen Cooper did a lot of work on helping to get some of this moved forward in Kentucky, I think it was.
And we actually, and she did, and we passed, when I worked for that organization, a third-party payer bill in Kentucky, which is the only third-party payer bill.
Fantastic, yes.
But I guess, but they passed in Kentucky.
Yeah.
Not without some problems.
Sure, yeah.
But anyway, so I mean, it's moving forward.
There's momentum for sure.
There's momentum. The issue that it to me right now, it's getting that grassroots voice right now. You hit it, 'cause you make them say no
right
to your face, your constituent's face. Like, they're not going to do that. They're going to figure every other way around that. But
right. And we can definitely help you get those meetings set up and coordinate that. And with Jim's help, we're able to do a lot of those things. So, we've covered a lot of ground today, and I don't want to go too much longer, but I did want to just to give you an opportunity to address some of the accumulator issue is unique in of itself. There's definitely some things happening there that I think that are unique. But is there anything else that you wanted to address about that issue before we go?
Well, it's Actually, I want to address some humor about it.
Okay.
So,
It's good to laugh about some of this stuff because if you don't laugh, you cry.
right. So, I really do want to give props out to the National Hemophilia Foundation, Colette Kolianos, who's
Stellar.
she's
Unbelievable.
phenomenal.
I know.
I've never met somebody. She, I think, knows more about the payer perspective, and as a former treatment center social worker, nurse, and the person who worked with these patients and these programs directly, she is just phenomenal with this, and she's a fountain of information. And whenever I have a question, that's who I go to.
Yeah.
And I'd love to carry her bags for the rest of my career because she's one of the smartest people I've ever known. But it's interesting because I was on a panel with her a couple of years ago, and she said, what the insurance company says about the copay card is when you're around the table with them, they say, well, we don't like the manufacturer of copay cards. We prefer copayment assistance programs through charities. And I had to laugh about that because, so that's what, when they're complaining about the copay cards.
Is that because they're dealing with only $1 and they're easier to squash, or is that?
I don't. Right. That's but they point to copay assistance programs. But my attitude, what I say is, well, they're never going to be on the copay assistance program if we're going to block their premium assistance. Right. I do think there's some disingenuous arguments. Not that I laugh about that. Right. Oh, we like the copay assistance programs at the charities. No, you don't. Right. You've been trying to stop those for years too. But to deal with to stop the one issue, they're going to point to the other. And I said, there's nothing that stops them. And then I always believe that once they get the one thing nailed down, then they set their target at the other to get that. So it was just a real funny when the industry came back and said, we really like copay assistance at charities.
Yeah, it's a distraction of conveence.
Yes,
there's a way for them to be able to say pit one thing against the other and keep ping ponging it until eventually they're like, hey, we're playing soccer. We're not even playing ping pong. Why are you even at that table? I mean, it's crazy.
It is a distraction of convenience. I love how you write
that.
Yeah, that's an excellent way of describing it.
Yeah.
But it was just, but I mean, every state eventually is going to have a accumulator ban because that's where it's gained momentum and public policy is achieved with through small steps, which. Right. There's a federal accumulator bill.
What about Bob? It all goes back to baby steps.
Exactly. I haven't watched that movie in forever. Yes, that's exactly it. But it's funny. Dane Christensen said to me the other day when we were reading some of these copay accumulator, he goes, "You realize nothing. If they decide they're not going to accept third-party assistance, then these accumulator bans are kind of pointless."
Which may be part of the reason why. They keep ping-ponging the issue back and forth between different types of organizations.
I mean, right now it's helping patients.
Right.
But, it's funny because there was talking about introducing a third-party bill in Virginia. It was the patient advocates who stopped it because it would go back into the insurance law where the accumulator ban is. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there is... the reason we never took a state-by-state approach, which they have with accumulator, is because I didn't have the resources. I didn't have the bandwidth to fight it on 50-state front. To me, the best use of resources was federal, and we had gotten far. We had gotten far. So, that was the real problem that I always noticed is when Kramer moved over to the Senate, we didn't have a House champion, and the House leadership flipped. So we had and Democrats just almost immediately started talking about drug pricing. So we really did get lost in that debate. And I understand you're a new guy in a new body of only 100 people, so that was part of the problem.
Yeah, it's hard to get. You have to choose your battles and know what what is it that you think you can accomplish. One of the things I think that is important to note is that. How many co-signers did you have on the original bill that we?
The original was close to approximately 150, and then the second time it was introduced was about 180.
Right.
And these were hard fought.
Phenomenal.
That was man. I call it man-to-man combat, Jonathan.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember.
It was there.
Yeah.
every day I was like, okay, who do I set my? But again, it was me.
Right.
And it was working with groups. I mean, I know it was working with you,
absolutely,
like, to get the Louisiana delegation, and most of the Louisiana delegation signed on.
Right.
I mean, but it took a lot to get
hard.
Cedric Richmond. Here's the problem that used to get upset about. Like Cedric, we were trying to get Cedric Richmond to work with Kramer to be he drug his feet. And finally, Kramer's like, I'm just dropping the bill. Like, but because of Gary Cross and the people who are on the PSI board, we had a great foothold in Louisiana, and so we always had most of their support. Took a little while with some of them. I mean, Clay Higgins. Nobody sees my eye roll. No, Clay Higgins. He was a lot of fun. I'm trying to think who else. So he had Garrett Graves and Congressman Abraham. He was a great guy. It's a shame he's not there anymore. He was great, and so it was just there was a good delegation to work with. They were always very helpful. But there was a Congressman Abraham was a perfect example of when the staff changed. Signed on the bill. It wasn't him; it was the staffer.
Wow. So many moving parts, but I think the moral of the story here is that it's failing forward. It's a matter of you just keep trying and keep trying and keep trying and keep trying. This is part of the whole Rocky Balboa story, right? It's this underdog, like, you're not the right height, you're not the right build, you're not the right shape, you don't come from the right neighborhood, you come from you're a southpaw, you have everything against you that really is. It's just you don't fit the mold. And you know what? In rare disease, none of us have ever fit the mold about anything. I remember my mom one time was going through some doctor's appointments for some things and having a background of hemophilia and then cancer later and different things. She said that she was in the middle of one of these conversations with her doctor, and her doctor was sending some extremely rare incidences. This and such happened. She goes, "You're not doing me any favors by talking about extremely rare." She's like, "Because it's like a pothole on the road. If there is one, I'm going to find it." But it is that whole place of going, man, like, if it's rare, it'll find us. And I think that, my whole thing with this is that, are we an underdog? Were we an underdog in Ricky Ray?
Yes.
1,000, probably 100,000% an underdog in Ricky Ray. Were we an underdog?
I remember people telling me, like my college friends, going, "You're never going to get this passed."
Right.
I'm like,
watch me. Right. And look, there's a place where one of the things I love about you, Jim, specifically, is that I have watched you over and over and over again continue to take a step back, recalibrate, and reapproach. And that process of coming up against resistance, taking a step back, retooling, and reapproaching is that is not for the faint of heart. It is not only not for the faint of heart, but it's also, to me, exemplifies the courage that it takes that to continue to see progress actually take place and actually see change take place.
It takes about 12 hours. Like, because last Thursday night, I was on after I had that, I told you about that.
Yeah.
We ran into some trouble with the house sponsor.
Yeah.
And it took me about 12 hours to figure it out, or I shouldn't say 12 hours. Carolee and I went for a walk, and she's like, "Well, you're in a bad mood tonight. What happened?" I usually have the little breakdown, and then I'd have, a colleague of mine always said, you have to have once you have a breakdown, it doesn't matter as long as you have a breakthrough. And I did. So I was like, well, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. So by 9:00, I was okay. So yeah, you're right. You have to step back and you have to figure out what's it going to take.
Right. But I love that about you because not everybody is, number one, not everybody is wired that way. But number two, not everybody is diligent enough to keep up the pressure to see change actually through until it changes. And I just want to say I sincerely appreciate your friendship, your commitment. I know you do this from a pure heart, from a place of personal experience and pain. and also from a place of joy to really fight for your own family, to fight for, the friends that you've gained through the process of the many years that you fought for this. You do this not because of accolades, not because of the money, not because of the rewards, not because of the visibility, not because of any of that. You do this because you truly love people and you love what you do and you're passionate about it. And it inspires me. I mean, I feel like a guy with a story. That's pretty much all I've got. And you have helped
built this
me
great organization. Stop.
But the point is that I feel like that, watching you continually get back up to bat has helped me feel like, you know what, maybe there is something that my story can be used for to help further a mission. Absolutely. That is potentially a legacy that could impact the next several generations, not just today, but could positively affect change that could impact patients who are living with rare and chronic illness for many generations to come. And so I'm on board. I'm with you 100%. And anything that we can do to be involved in making this happen, we want to be. I'm so grateful you're part of the Hope team now. Yes,
I am.
I am too. And jumping in with us to help us continue to craft initiatives to be able to do this. Yes. But man, I just thank you so much for being here with me today and being part of the podcast. This conversation has been excellent, and I certainly hope that people get a lot out of it. And if you have questions specifically for Jim, you can always email us at info@hopecharities.org, and we'll be glad to make sure we get you that message. But is there anything else you'd like to say before we go?
Thank you, Jonathan. I love being a member of the Hope team now, and I remember you and I meeting. I remember coming up to your booth, and who would have thought, it was maybe 10, 15 years ago, who would have thought that we'd be so closely working together. And thank you for inspiring me with this, because after talking about it with you for this last part, I said I can't wait to get back to work and get those co-sponsors and get this going again. So,
well, at the end of the day, it's all about grassroots, and you do it best. So thanks so much for being here and doing what you do.
Here.
All right. If you've enjoyed this podcast, make sure that you subscribe and hit a like button. Share this with a friend who you think might need to know more about what we're doing. But we certainly are grateful for each and every one of you. And like Jim said, if you have interest in wanting to be able to get involved and get connected, please reach out to us. info@hope-charities.org is a great place to start. You can send us a message, and we'd be glad to get you plugged into the right channel. So thanks so much for listening today, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one. Take care.